So now I'm really pleased to introduce Shannon Forrester, although she'll tell you about herself, but we're really happy that you are here and that you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
It's all about who we were and who we are today. Thank you. Just like
Great.
Hi, thank you.
My name is Shannon Forrester, and I am the great niece of John Morris, who was the first striker killed in the Homestead battle in 1892. I'm a retired chief operations officer of a corporation in Atlanta, and I'm of a corporation in Atlanta, Georgia. And I've started about 10 years ago. I did a Google search of my school just to see what was there, and I found all of this, and from the battle. We grew up knowing the story, but we needed to tell the story. And as his sister was my great grandmother, and I grew up with her. She told some of the stories. It was hard for her to get the stories out, but just to know where he came from and what all he did. And just to let you know what research looks like. This is research. Of the Morris family and the Law family. So this is what it takes to do it. But it's that important, I think, for everyone to have it written. And John was just a wonderful man. He died at 28. He was from Wales and from a little town called Coombe. And Coombe means a valley, and Avon is Avon River. So it was River Valley. And it was in the Brecon Beacons near Cardiff. Very, very poor town. It was mainly a tin mill and the coal mines. And you either worked at the tin mill or the coal mines, or you didn't work. And I have a picture of his parents' wedding certificate, which is really cool. And all it's on there is from 1860, I believe, are two X's because they couldn't read or write. So these are people who couldn't escape. So the main thing was his parents wanted to make sure that their children got an education. And I actually have photographs of his parents. This is his father from about 1880. And he was the coal miner. That's all he could do, and worked in the tin mill. He was a tin furnace man. So you can see the stains on his hands, and the suit that he's in is just wool scraps that were made, and that's his best suit. You can see how proud he looks, just standing there. And this was him. And then I have a picture of his mother, 5 feet tall, tiny little woman, never a smile. I mean, it's hard to smile when it's really, really that difficult out for your life. So they're trying to give their 8 children, education. He's working in the mines. You could go to school until you were 15, and then you left school and you had to work. So at 15, John, who was the oldest son, went to work at the tin mill. He was a tin furnace man, and his older sister, who was 17, who was 19, was a tin furnace woman. The women also worked there. And the children, starting at age 6, could work in the mines. The boys could. And the girls at age 10 could become domestic workers. So at age 6, my family, the parents here said, we have to get an education for these kids. So the father worked extra hard. And then John and his sister went into the mill, but they were educated. They could speak and read and write in English and in Welsh. Super unusual. But they knew they had to do this to get their kids out of this. So
They learned English at school?
Yes, at school, because they knew that was coming, and that was going to be the big draw. So it was expensive for them to do that, and they lived in a row of tin mill workers' houses, which is just like, looked like a row house place. And I'm sure they had maybe 2 or 3 bedrooms for all those people. And every morning, the women and the children would go down at the end of the road with their buckets and bring back the water for that day's work and everything, cleaning, cooking, bathing, everything. So that was a hard life. And my John has a little sister who was at that point 6 years old. She was my great grandmother. And this is her picture. And this was taken when she was 16, which was the same year that John died. So she was 16 years old, and that's her. And this was in Pennsylvania. But so at that point, Margaret, who was his sister, was going to school, and down the road, she would go every day past the mill, past the mines. And in there were her two little cousins who worked there. They were 6 and 7. She was 6. And at that point, their parents couldn't afford for them to go to school. So she could only play with them when they weren't exhausted from working in the mines. And the smaller you were, the farther into the mines you could go, because they would have them, when they're with a candle. You can imagine how horrible this is for a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old. But when she came back from school one day, the mine whistle was going off. And that meant that there was a landslide in a crash in the mill. So all were lost, including her 6 and 7-year-old cousins. So she had to pass that every day on her way to school. You can imagine what that does to a kid. But that also prompted his parents to say, John, it's time. You've got to get out of here and help us. So John, at 18, he can read and write in English and in Welsh. He has now 3 years of experience working in the tin mill, is now responsible to go to America by himself and start a family here, start a way of making a living. So he rides a cart to the train. He had to save money to get him there. Rides a 7-hour trip up to Liverpool to get on to the docks, find the ship, get on the ship, and with 700 and some people in steerage in 3rd class, he comes to America into New York. Then he gets the train into Pittsburgh, and then he walks from Pittsburgh to Homestead, and now he's here earning a living. But he started out as a skilled worker because he had 3 years. At 18, he was a skilled worker who could read and write in English and in Welsh, which was a big boon for the mill because a lot of the workers couldn't speak English. So he was translating, he was supervising, he was doing all these other things, and really rose through the ranks very quickly. And if I can get his title correct, he was a pitman, a pull around is what they call it. I don't know what he was pulling, but he was pulling something. And in the ingot pit in Blooming Mill number 1. So that I think was probably near here where we are on the river. And he was doing very well. And in just a couple of years, he made enough to buy a house. And it was on 9th Avenue. And because all the skilled workers lived above 8. And it was 20 feet wide. It was a little tiny brown vine-covered cottage that he lived in. And right after that, he married Hannah Phillips, who lived on 9th Street. And her brother was a bricklayer. So her brother and John were best friends. So Hannah moved into a little cottage. They got married. It was really sweet. And they were doing very well, still sending money home to Wales because his salary was good. He was very skilled, and it was enough to help them. But then his father at 49 dies in Wales. So his mother is now, just distraught. She has 7 children still at home. One is working, and that's Elizabeth, the older one, but she's got all these little kids. What does she do? Well, 2 of the girls right away got married because she knew that we're going to have to come to America, and John's going to help us get there. So it's a very amazing story. How does a woman who is 5 feet tall, speaks only Welsh, can't read or write, and now she's got to get 4 children who are 5, 7, 9, and 11 to America? So I mean, what a thought. You can imagine now what you're going to do. The only saving grace was the 9-year-old Margaret, my great grandmother, and her older brother, who was 11, who was Albert, could read and write in English and in Welsh. Like, rudimentary. They commanded the language, but they could get them. So they were the ones in charge now of getting their mother, who couldn't read or write, translating and doing everything, to America. So John and Hannah save up about $250 and send it over there. And now here they are. The mother says the only thing she brought with her, they had no suitcases, they had no trunks. They had a cloth sack with all their possessions, and each child carried their own. So imagine here you are at 48 years old. You're taking your 5-year-old, your 7-year-old, and your 9 and 11 are the ones doing the whole trip for you. So they have to change currency. They've got to find a train schedule. They follow John's whole steps there, riding the cart from the village. And I couldn't find the village 100 years later in a car. A problem. This is a tiny little place, but they've got to get to the cart in this river valley, and it's in the mountains. So they get to the cart, and then they ride the 7-hour train ride, 228 miles to Liverpool. They've got to find the docks. They've got to find the right ship. They've got to get on it, get the instructions, go to immigration, and then get on the ship. The ship is a trip in its own. How
They have passports? Do they have passports?
they didn't even there were no such things back then. In fact, Ellis Island didn't even start until the 1890s. So this is just they were mainly just immigrant ships coming over back and forth from Liverpool to either New York or Philadelphia. So that's where they came from. So on the ship, the single women were at the back of the ship, the single men were at the front of the ship, and the families were in the center. Now there were 32 first class passengers, 140 intermediate or second class passengers, and 780 some third class passengers, all in the belly of this ship. Now you can imagine what this ship was like. So here they are. They slept on bunks that were 2 and 3 high, and the bunks were called family bunks, and they slept 6. They were just wooden bunks, and on that was a straw mattress covered in burlap. That's what you got. So any bedclothes you got with you. So for my family, the bedclothes were the sacks of their own clothes that they brought. So here is our little family of 5. They had to have a stranger in that bed with them too for 9 days. Now, down the center of the ship, and these are all along the sides of the belly of the ship, and down the center is a long table. Well, there are no chairs. So you stood up for 2 meals a day, which the first meal was going to be oatmeal, porridge. And then the second meal was going to be some kind of rice pudding that had different things in it. And that's what you ate for 9 days with 4 of, you can imagine a 4-year-old, I'm hungry. Sure. Well, you have to wait until it comes. They were cooked in big kettles. And you were assigned your own plate and spoon. And after you ate, you had to go rinse it off in the same tub that everybody uses. And that was how you cleaned your plate. So everybody tried to finish that first. So they got the cleanest water. And then you only had an hour a day where you could go up on the lower decks. And they were assigned times that they could go up there, rain or shine. If it's raining, you either go out there or you stay inside. And the portholes on the side of the ship, if it was raining outside, had to be closed, or if the seas were rough, they had to be closed. So you can imagine, especially if the seas were rough, what you do with a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, and it just is horrible. So they get all the way across their 9 days to America, to New York, into Philadelphia. John came into New York. And they then, after the 7-hour train ride, the 9-day ship voyage, now they have the 12-hour, they have to find the train station, get through immigration. This is all in with a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old doing all this stuff, reading all the ship instructions, finding the train. Now they have to get on the train and drive 12 hours to Pittsburgh. So, and it was $9 each, which was a huge amount of money back then for them. So they finally get to Pittsburgh. Then they have to walk to Homestead from the train station. So you can imagine on 9th Avenue down here, John and Hannah waiting. John was probably working when they got there, but seeing these bedraggled poor little kids, we call them the little band of immigrants is what we call our family for them. They're very sweet. So as you can imagine, here you are, a new bride, and here you have your own little cottage, 2 bedrooms. The house is 20 feet, less than 20 feet wide, 2 bedrooms upstairs. And all of these new little kids are coming in there. They needed beds and chairs and food and room, and they didn't have any of that. So after a while, and the kids had to go to school. So they finally got the kids in school. And then John, working a million hours, found a room across the river in a mill worker's cottage, Welsh immigrants, who took them in, and they rented a room there. So all 5 of them crowded, the mother and the 4 children crowded into that room. So they were living there. And then, and this is Margaret. This is the little lady. My right there, 5 feet tall. They like about, I'm 5 feet tall, so the apples are tall, the Welsh tree. And so here they are, all in Pittsburgh. Everything is going well. My little great grandmother, this this little lady with no smiling face, brought over a bag of peony bulbs. That's the only thing, the only luxury she had. And she planted the peony bulbs at the little house over on Night Down. And those peonies followed my family for 80 years. We would dig them up and move them over. I grew up with those peonies, and I was born in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which is about 50 miles north of here. There's a trolley between here and Newcastle. And I can remember my grandfather mowed the lawn and would say, "Oh, peonies." There's 2 rows of them, and he had to run down the middle of it to get the mower because the bees would start swarming all over the place. So he couldn't wait for the peonies to be over with. But here they are, and everything is doing well. He's making enough money for all of them to, it's meager. This is not anything lovely, but it's meager. And then I won't go into, you all know the battle stories, but I'm telling the stories of the family. This is a family tribute of what happened to the people and how it affects them, and especially from the women's perspective too, which we always talk about the men who were the workers and the men who died. What happened to the families and the women and the children? You know, we don't have those stories. So we have this one, and this I think is important to tell and to hold on to. So here they are doing well. The peonies are planted, the peonies are going. And now John, I believe, and there's more research. And has anybody gotten to read the story? Has anybody got to read the story yet? Yeah, good. When he's doing so well, he is, I believe, a leader. And I'm finding out more now that's not even in the story, that he was assigned to the pump house. And from midnight to 8 was his shift. And he was assigned at the window. Has everybody been to the pump house? Well, that's good. Good. Well, in one of the windows, you'll see the little write-up of John. That's the window where he was shot. And he was gathering guns at his house. So I believe that he was one of the strike leaders. He was well liked. He belonged to the Knights of Pythias, the Amalgamated Union, the International Order of Odd Fellows, and was in everything. They went to church every Sunday. Yeah, they were all going south. And then finally, Hannah had a baby. So they were in their little cottage, just the 3 of them. And mother-in-law and the kids are across the river, but still, you know, it's a long walk, but they would walk it to see everybody. So when the strike was happening, John was gathering all of the rifles he could at his house, and then it was time to go. So at 8 o'clock, he got off the ship, went home, and then the alarm sounded. And Hannah, his wife, was interviewed many times by the Pittsburgh newspapers. And what she said was, when it went off, she was afraid that he was going to die. And she said, please, she was begging him, please stay home, don't go. And he said, I have to protect my job and my family. I can't be a black sheep. I've got to go. So after being on guard duty for 8 hours, he now goes, she said, with a gun, rifle on his shoulders, he ran down to the pump house. In less than an hour, he was killed. He was the first one shot between the eyes with a sharpshooter from the Pinkertons on the ship. And that was just beyond her comprehension. They, in the pump house, where you see the windows, behind that is just this depression for all of the mechanics of the pumps were there, these big metal things. He fell back over all of that down. It was about 25 or 30 feet. And his friends picked him up and carried him to the house. You can imagine less than an hour of Hannah. That's what she has to deal with. So immediately, you know, she's just beside herself. And she has to, the mother-in-law comes, all the children come. They had to prepare him for the funeral and for the Homestead Cemetery, which is now, thank you for being so wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So she's 26. John was 28. He'd only been there 10 years. It was 1892 when he came, 1882 when he came, and 1892 when he died. But 10 years he devoted to the mill. And so at 28, he now leaves his whole family now with nothing. They have no survivor benefits, no orphans, anything, no no pension, no nothing. So they are all now trying to get by. The funeral was unbelievable. When you look at the how many people came and what all they did. First of all, John and Hannah didn't have enough money to bury it.
Anybody need
They
water?
were still trying to cover all of that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anybody else? I got one sit down, one.
So they have no money, but the Order of Odd Fellows took over and said, we will do everything. They brought the casket, they had silver handles to the house, and they provided the lot, which is up on the top of the cemetery. Has anybody been to John's grave up on the top of the hill? He's in the circle, the big circle there with the granite monument. He has a little tiny headstone that says John E. Morris, and then 1864 when he was born, to 1892 when he died. So, and the E stands for Edward. So, and the other thing, Morris is Smith in Welsh. John Smith, John Morris. There are millions of Morrises. And in fact, in the cemetery, there are over 30 Morrises. None of them are related to us. So that's why it's John E. He wanted everybody to know I'm John E. Morris. So, so now they're trying to prepare him in his black church suit with his white shirt and his vest. And at that, when you're 16 years old, this was taken just before he died. And she's 16. Now she's going to be carrying the baby through the whole thing, which is hard. So his mother and his sister, his older sister Rachel, and her husband came to Newcastle a couple of years before John was killed, before the strike, and he was a weaver. And so his sister Rachel and her husband, and they had 2 little kids, were living in Newcastle. They came to the funeral too. It was like the next day. They have to all come in from Newcastle on the drone. So they have to prepare him. And then they have to go to the church. And the Order of Odd Fellows just had this unbelievable, in all of the unions, they all showed up. They had bands, they had marching people. They all were wearing black. They all showed up at the churches. The church they went to only held 450 people. It was overflowing out onto the street. And the streets were lined with thousands of people, not just for his funeral, but also Peter Ferris and Silas Wayne were buried the same day. So they made sure, the unions did, that they were well attended. So going up to the cemetery, there were literally thousands of people walking up that hill behind the marchers and the bands. And his family, they had 13 carriages outside. And the dispatch called them the little band of mourners. That's it. Sorry, it just gets a little through you. But they get into the 13 carriages. They only take up 2. The rest of them are people from the unions and dignitaries that they really wanted to honor John at that point. So they are trying to keep as solemn as they can up to the top of the hill. But up there, everybody down. It was a very short service. After, I think it's probably pronounced it McHillier, Reverend McHillier. He gave eulogy and he talked about how unnecessary it was, because the union workers did not want violence. No one wanted violence, but the Pinkertons caused it, and that really made it bad. So when they got to the top of the hill, they were joined by one of the other funerals, and they were going over to the Catholic cemetery across the road. And you can literally, from John's grave, you can see one of the other graves over there. And then the other gentleman is buried a little bit down the hill from where John is buried, and you can't see it from there. The other 3 gentlemen were buried the second day. And then one died several days later, and he's buried in Verona. That's Mr. Rudder. But all of these people, when you think of what all they went to in their families, one of the workers' wives was pregnant and had 4 children, and no one here. So she had no support system and was destitute. So the funeral was amazing with all these thousands of workers up there. But then afterwards, they said it was silent when they all left. They all knew what they were coming down the hill to, and that they were going to be next, or they were losing their jobs, or something was going to happen. So they all dispersed. So at that point, John's mother and the 4 kids had to now move back into John's little cottage because they couldn't afford to do anything else. In fact, Hannah went to the state and to the orphans court and borrowed $400 to see if they could get them through with the $400. And that didn't last terribly long. So at that point, John's mother said, I can't be a burden anymore. I've got it. So she took the 4 kids to Newcastle and moved there and said, Hannah, please come. And Hannah said, I'll stay with my brothers here. And my husband and my baby are here. So the baby died 6 months after it was. Oh, I mean, what else can these 4 people have? Houses. So she gets to Newcastle. My great grandmother does. And her daughter moves in with that daughter, and tries to get by there. They rent a room for all of them. And by that time, the boys could start working in the tin mill. So they worked in the tin mill in Newcastle, like my grandfather and a lot of the other people in my family. So you would think that all of them could get by, but it was very difficult. Hannah now is left with no money, no anything in Homestead except her brother. Her debts were so severe that they foreclosed on her property. And they made her 2 years after her husband died and she loses her child. Everybody's gone. They make her auction off her house. And she has to stand on the steps of that house on 9th Avenue while they auction off all of her possessions and her house. They paid $960 for their house and they had it paid off just before John died. And then they only auctioned off for $900. And then all of her possessions, and I have a list of all of her possessions from the auction. And they only totaled $129. So you can imagine it's things like, curtains that she made herself and chairs that didn't match and a table and little things like that. But everything, the lamp was 50 cents. That one lamp that they had went for 50 cents. So she lost everything and she had to literally walk away from that auction with nothing. Also, she went to her brother's house and then not long after that, she went back to Wales. And my great grandmother also went back to Wales. She still had 2 daughters who were living there and raising their family. But the Queen stayed. We stayed. So we're here. And we all moved to, we're in Newcastle and everybody did well. I have a picture here, which is really fun.
You still have the peonies?
We don't. I wish we did. But after separating all these years, they finally died. They've got 80 years, so I thought that was really good. But now we honor everybody. Whenever we live in a place where there are peonies, where we grow them, we have. But this is a little band of immigrants where they grew up. So this is taken in Newcastle and the mill worker house where Margaret, the little 16-year-old, and her husband, David, who was the dearest, my great-grandfather, perfect little people. And the little girl standing on the porch is my grandma. And she became a registered nurse at age 19. So they educate, and her sister was a nurse at age 19 in Newcastle. And they had 5 children who survived. They lost 2. But I remember playing on that same porch. So there is Margaret, there is Albert with his straw hat. They're all dressed up and they wanted to have a family photo taken, which was really good, to send back to Wales. And this sister over here is Dinah. She stayed in Wales, but she came over to see her family. This was taken in 1903. So this is 11 years off the strike. But all the little bands and their families, their wives and a couple children there, are all the ones who grew up in Newcastle. You can see that, if you guys can see it. And then this is John. It's the only image we have. And I found it in the newspaper. And I gave a copy of it. I think, did I give you one?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I did. Thank you. So the foundation has a copy of his picture. And he was described as a stout man with a round face like his father, but very strong. And even they said that he was a very strong man. I guess from what he did, this probably from strenuous work. And that's what the mill houses look there back in 1892. Just this, I had this done for the meeting we had at the cemetery. So this will be back again. I wrote a letter or wrote an article in the Valley Mirror back in 2020. So that was from the article, but it had all of the information in it, except for the backstory of coming over. And I think that's as important a story as the John story here. But we honor him. And I'll be going up to his grave later. Yeah. So thank you all for letting me.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I'm sure people have questions or comments.
Anything you want.
You're ready
Richard.
ready to field some things here?